Pete, from what I can see of the little corner of her face, she's real cute.
Cutie.
How old is she now?
She'll be 5 weeks tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Time flies, huh?
Not fast enough.
And next thing you know, you'll be paying for college.
I know. That's what I keep hearing.
Pete, if it ever gets you down, if life ever gets you down, just can I?
Yeah.
Just remember, it could be worse.
Yeah. Well, my 3-year-old is downstairs screaming her head off right now because it's bedtime. So I get it. I couldn't imagine having two at the same time like that. It's crazy.
Yeah, and my oldest was 2.5 at the time. Talk about a blur.
Yeah, right.
And how old are they now, Jay?
13 and 10. Same kind still get headaches, it's just different style.
Oh, I don't think that ever goes away, no matter how old they are.
I joked with a friend about not sleeping, and they said, at least you're not sleeping and you know where your kid is. When they get older, you don't sleep and you have no idea where they are. So
True.
Jay, did you say that John was going to be a few minutes late?
Yeah.
Does everyone feel that we should at least get started?
Yeah, why don't we open it up? Because I think
I say yes.
10 or 15 minutes, so.
Yes. Right then. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is a work session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is June 9, 2020. The first item on the agenda is roll call. Pam, would you like to do your usual?
Sure. Maria Mack,
Here.
Steve DeMasi,
Here,
Peter DiStefano,
here.
Joe Murphy,
Here.
Pam Rubinoff here, and John Riondo is going to be a little tardy. And how about the staff? Kayla Gray,
Here.
Brian Wagner,
Here.
Jay Parker,
Present.
and Amy Goins, special counsel.
Present.
Thank you, Pam. Our first agenda item is discussion of SK Homestyle project and potential zoning ordinance amendments, relative cottage zoning, inclusionary zoning, and accessory dwelling units. And I might add that we also have Jeff Davis from Horsley Witten with us this evening.
Kayla, do you want to give a little?
Yeah, I'll give a little kick. I'll give a little kickoff, and then we'll hand off to Jeff. And Jeff, feel free to kick things back and forth as we all want to. But so you all, the last time we all discussed as a group, the work going on under SK Homestyle was back in February, which feels like an eternity ago and is actually slowly becoming a little while ago. So what we did at the February work session, I'm just going to kind of get a lay of the land for everyone, is we talked through these three first topics of potential regulatory changes with SK Homestyle. And if you guys think back, you'll remember October, before the February meeting, we had the joint meeting with the Affordable Housing Collaborative, and we talked a lot about the very well participated in survey that we did in the fall. And these three topics came out as sort of the low-hanging fruit and potentially sort of town-wide policies we might think about changing a little bit. So they quickly became what we're sort of referring to as this first wave of regulatory considerations or changes. So in March, we had set up to run what I'm sure would have been a wonderful open house, but it did not, COVID-19 didn't give us the opportunity to do it. On the, I believe actually the day before the open house was scheduled was when we started shutting down public gatherings and restricting things further. And so we made a change. Jeff and I made a change to see if we could not lose all of the time that we were in the midst of COVID-19 on the SK Homestyle project, because it is notably a large project and one that we've had on the books and open for a while, and that there's a lot to sort of still come from. And so we wanted to make sure we found a way to use these months. And so what we did was we changed that to be a virtual open house. We took the information that we would have had prepared on poster boards around the room in the rec center on these 3 topics and change them into a survey. And so we tried to take the same information and give it all to people with links or directly in the survey to get a little bit back from that. And so Jeff has prepared sort of a summary of what we found from that. And I won't steal his glory here to talk through what he found in the survey, but where we sit now is that last week, the Affordable Housing Collaborative had a meeting. Jeff and Brian and I attended that, and we talked a bit with the Affordable Housing Collaborative about what came out of that survey, but that was a less in-depth conversation than you all will have, but I imagine you assume that. So from there, we're now here tonight at this work session. Jeff has been given my summary of notes from our February work session, because you all probably recall that Jeff didn't attend that with us. So Jeff and I have spoken a bit, more than a bit probably after that. And so he has my notes, and the memo you see from Jeff dated June 2nd is one that sort of describes where I felt like we had gotten to with that February work session. And so we'll talk through what we talked about then as being things we wanted to change, what we heard when we took the sort of direction you all seemed to be headed in February to the people who completed the survey, and talk a little bit about what sort of the second attempt at figuring out what exactly we want the regulations to be on these is right now, going from the first draft that Horsley Witten put together, off of the feedback from February, what we heard in the virtual open house, and now sort of back to you all. Our hope here is that we'll use this work session to sort of nail down some of the details, actually really, if we could, a lot of the details on these 3 topics, and that we can basically be getting in a spot where potentially at your next work session, we can have revisions to these in a finalized state, looking a little bit, basically looking like draft ordinance. And that from there over this summer, either at your July regular session, if the July work session goes as we sort of are hoping it will, seeing a recommendation to the council, who would be sort of looking to hold public hearings and a first wave of changes on these in either August, but August public hearings on zoning amendments are sometimes controversial or concerning to members of the public. So perhaps it'll be September, but we're also in very strange times right now. So that's sort of where we're at within this sort of our plan of attack right now on these first changes. With that, I'll probably hand it over to Jeff. At the end, I can sort of talk a little bit more about what the sort of second and third waves we're thinking might be coming out of this project. Those go into some of the other things we've been looking at, like village design guidelines, what types and what villages, and mixed use, some of the other topics we've been trying to explore here. But so with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Kayla. Good to see everyone. It's been a while. So I think what I would like to do is start with accessory apartments, just because that is the piece I have been least involved in, and I think there are fewer policy questions related to accessory apartments compared to the other 2 topics. and then move on from there to inclusionary zoning and cottages. So I want to take a moment to go over the results of the survey. We got, at the end of the day, 77 responses, which of course, compared to the 500 plus that we got for the first survey in the fall, was very disappointing. But as Caleb pointed out, and very rightly, had we in fact had the in-person open house in March and had 77 people show up, we would have been thrilled. So we've got to look at it from different perspectives. So again, the point of the survey was to bring to the public sort of the general policy direction that this body has been taking on these topics. So not to open up the barn doors and say, you know, let's talk about this from scratch, but to really dive into some specific policy directions that this body has been considering and get the pulse of the public on that direction. So for accessory apartments, 3 basic questions. And the first one, and I apologize, my screen is the opposite direction from my camera, so it's going to look like I'm looking away from you. I'm just looking at my screen. So the first question was, right now, if you want to build an accessory apartment in the R40, R30, or R20, R10, you have to have a larger lot than normal for a single family house in order to build that accessory apartment. And what we asked folks was, is that cool? Are you cool with that? Should you have to have a larger lot? Or could it be okay to build an accessory apartment on the lot size that you currently have? So we split this up into 3 questions. Was the lot should not have to be any larger within these zoning districts for an accessory apartment. And 62% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed. 35% strongly agreed. Only 29% disagreed. So you actually have pretty solid support for that concept. We asked a related question. Should lots have to be somewhat larger, but not as much as required today? So for example, right now you have to be twice as large if you are not on sewer and 50% larger if you are on sewer. So maybe saying, you know, you have to be 50% larger if you're not on sewer, but you don't have to change if you are. 52% agreed or strongly disagreed. And then the last question, should we keep the standard the way it is today where you have to increase the size? And only 35% agreed. So it really flip-flopped from that original question. So I think it's fair to say the majority of respondents would be very comfortable with that policy direction, which is very good news. The second question related to accessory apartments was, you have this issue where you require water conservation for accessory apartments within the town's groundwater protection overlay district. And the question was, does it make sense to tie these requirements to accessory apartments, but not to other things? And so the question was, should we be requiring these water conservation requirements from all development within the town's groundwater protection overlay district and not make that policy about accessory apartments? And there was strong support for that. 70% of respondents said yes, 30% said no. One thing I will point out for this body, if you do choose to go that route, the way it's written today is very specific to accessory apartments. So for example, you're not allowed to have, I believe, a washer dryer. And you will have to consider as a group, is that something you would want to apply to any development within this district? I think it is probably fair, though, that we can come up with a new list of water protection or water conservation requirements that could apply to any development within the overlay. So the third question related to accessory apartments has to do with height limits. So in certain zones, there is a height limit on accessory buildings which would in many cases preclude an accessory apartment, say above a garage. If you were to build an accessory apartment over a garage, it might only have a 7-foot ceiling, and just that it doesn't work. So the question was, would you be okay waiving that height limit strictly for accessory apartments on top of an existing accessory structure? And 68% of respondents said yes, 32% said no. So again, very encouraging. So all 3 of those policy directions that this body was considering seem to have, at least again, among the folks who took this survey, there's a general comfort for those directions. So I guess let's start with accessory apartments and open it up. Any questions about the survey? Any other questions about these potential policy directions?
Jeff, this is Marie. I just wanted to make a quick comment about the survey. I think the survey was useful, but I think we do need to remember that with a number of respondents, due to circumstances, technically it wouldn't be considered statistically viable. That said, it's still a useful tool in this effort.
And no, of course, it's not statistically significant. And as I said at the start, had we had an open house in person and 77 people showed up, we'd all been cheering. But yes, certainly there are thousands of people in the community who have not weighed in on this.
Would be tickled to get 77 people at a meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's true.
Jeff, this is Steve. I had a question regarding the height limit. Would you have a maximum in there?
Yeah, I think we'd probably want to put a maximum of, say, and it's whatever you're comfortable with, say 20 feet, 24 feet. I don't know, Kayla, if you had a chance to think through specific numbers.
Yeah, you know what, we talked about this a little bit in February. I think we ended up saying that either 22 or 24 feet was what realistically got you to usable stories of space. And I think that was where we landed. I think initially we thought about increasing it just to 20. And I believe our discussion in February, surrounded by people who know how to build things, was 20 feet actually might not be enough to get you there. But I could be misremembering that. So I'm curious if you guys, where you all are on that. I think we sort of had said 22 to 24 feet is what got a second story of usable second story.
Yeah, that's a pretty good rule of thumb.
Yeah, I would say that makes sense. So we'd have a bunch of flat roofs around town if we didn't do that.
Yeah.
This is Jay. I think we had a similar discussion with the coastal amendments last year when we talked about the building height, and that it wasn't explicitly relative to this discussion, but I think we all agree that 20 feet, even 22 feet was a little bit tight.
Yeah, this is Marie. I agree with that range. 22 to 24 seems reasonable.
So I want to ask a question on this, and I think I might have asked this before, but the idea of allowing like an accessory allowing accessory structures to get 22 or 24 feet tall if they contain an accessory apartment. I want to sort of talk with you guys and hear your thoughts on that because I think that if it contains an accessory apartment is a pretty notable adjustment there. I think my first thought on it is that it seems like a perfectly reasonable way to approach it. But I think what I want to sort of add in there for conversation and see what your thoughts all are on this is, if something's built already, and say you were building an accessory building on your lot, period. Say you were building a garage, and you were allowed to build that garage to be 17 feet high because it didn't have an accessory apartment. But in the future, you might be interested in putting an accessory apartment in on that structure. You'd be less likely to do it, right? Because you would have to then be taking a bigger you have to be taking on a project to raise the roof, change it, et cetera. On the alternative, if you got a permit for your accessory structure to be 24 feet high because you were building an accessory apartment, and in the future you no longer used it as an accessory apartment, it stopped being that for you, and instead you used it for additional storage space or something very different, you may have then just been allowed to sort of build yourself something that is taller, that can be reused. It's strange to require it to be, I'm wondering if it's strange to require it to be for accessory structures, period. I think it's doable, but I think if you did that, I think it's important to sort of think through what that means for reuse of structures in either scenario, to or from an accessory apartment. Changing the blanket height for accessory structures to 22 or 24 feet would alleviate any difference between whether or not you built it with the intention for it to be an apartment or not. We wouldn't tell you you had a building that was too tall if it no longer held an accessory apartment. We wouldn't tell you you could then increase the height of your roof, which would be a costly undertaking if you did put an accessory apartment in there. It does also change the height of your accessory structures allowed everywhere, which potentially you have to be sort of aware that any property owner building a garage, outbuilding, et cetera, may build it to be 22 or 24 feet tall. And you know, does that seem right? I think you could fall either way on it, but I think it's good to think about what happens if you make it specific to accessory structures only with accessory apartments in them.
Kayla, not being as familiar with the zoning ordinances as I hopefully will be in the future, what is the setback for an accessory structure? Because, you know, if you're jumping up to 24 foot tall and you're only 5 or 10 feet from a property line, that all of a sudden is going to be pretty imposing on the abutting property. So maybe if you're going to allow the extra height, you push it back from a property line a little bit further.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it is. That is a good idea. I think that's a part of the conversation we also started having in February on these, was that in the R10, I think your accessory structure setback is something like 6 feet. It is very, very close.
Yeah.
Brian, it is very close to a property line.
And that's what I'm thinking about on those small lots. It's going to be a very imposing structure as opposed to a larger lot where people might not even notice.
Certainly, we've worked in communities where there's a ratio where you have a minimum setback, but then for every height or every foot of height above a certain height, you have to step back even further. So we can certainly look into some sort of ratio.
Yeah, I think the ratio idea is a smart one because it really is related to the size of the lot.
I think that's one thing that's maybe missing in the conversation is when we talk about accessory units or accessory, we're not necessarily talking about whether it's within the existing structure, in addition to the existing structure, or a standalone structure. So I can see not having any increase in lot size for the accessory apartments that are within the existing structure, or maybe in addition to the existing structure. But when we start talking about having a separate structure, it could stop being imposing to the neighbors when you're talking about maybe an R10 or an R20. So,
Although, Kaylin, correct me if I'm wrong, you'd still be looking at the same coverage requirements. So like if you couldn't build a new structure in the backyard if you had already hit your building coverage requirement.
Yeah.
yeah, but on something like an R20, you're probably not going to hit the maximum coverage requirements, even with an existing structure.
20 or 25%, it's on an R20.
Yeah, so you're not going to have 5,000 square feet of floor area, I wouldn't expect.
Joe, what about having having the accessory apartment in a freestanding structure makes it feel more impactful?
it's coming in and out to your conversation, so I'm losing you a little bit.
I'll try again. What is it about having it detached that makes it feel more impactful on the neighbors?
I think combination of detached and a combination of a larger structure, at some point it starts feeling like two houses on one lot. That's my thought. So I think in some cases it could fit, but in other cases, I think it will become pretty impactful. So you take a relatively new subdivision, let's say R20, the house lots are probably all going to be just around 20,000 square feet, because that's how the builder met the minimum requirements. And then you have something that looks like two houses on that. Some of the neighbors could feel impacted. I don't think that really too much of an impact if it's within the existing structure, or maybe even a little addition onto the existing structure. But anyways, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I hear you. I think, I guess what I'd counter that with, to whatever extent I'd counter your opinion, because it's valid in your opinion, is they'd still be limited to the 750 square feet in size.
50 square feet.
Yeah, so they'd still be held to that 750 square feet for the size. And that size restriction is largely there to make sure it doesn't become a second principal size home there. But if you attach the 750 square foot apartment to a 3-car garage beside it, it certainly does become a very large structure you got in the back there.
And I can see cases where it could fit in with the surrounding homes. If you had a house where maybe the zoning changed and you merged two lots, putting a accessory structure of 750 square feet, even with the garages on that other lot that was merged, probably would fit in, because all the houses in the neighborhood have the smaller. I mean, I think one possible consideration, I just throw this out, is that maybe for the accessory apartments that are within the structure or in addition to the structure, no additional lot size is required, but when it's a separate structure, that additional lot size is required. Just a thought.
This is Steve. I live in Sweet Allen Farm, and it's 20,000 square foot lot, so 25,000. I have a 2-car garage on my house, and I think we had to get a waiver on the garage to the property line. So, and if you drive through this neighborhood, I think you're going to see that most of them have a 1 or 2-car garage, and there really wouldn't be any room to add an accessory unit adjacent to the house. It would have to go behind the current structure.
Or on top of.
Or on top of it, yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity for on top of these structures, or, because, and I think what's the intent of this, like, accessory structure? Where are we trying to put these? It sounds like we are trying to put these in like tighter areas as well, like the R10 and the R20. So we're going to have to come up with a solution that works if we want to build it where we want them to build it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're putting it over top of a garage, that's one thing, but what Joe was referring to, a freestanding.
But also remember, if it's freestanding, then it's going to be a 750 square foot freestanding cottage. That's going to be tiny. I mean, imagine there might be some people who, I mean, there are tiny houses out there that you can buy, pre-built and ship into your backyard. I guess that's a possibility. But if you are talking about a completely separate structure, it's going to be a really small structure. And it's not, I mean, like, you're not going to have a 750 square foot structure that goes up 24 feet either,
Right.
Well, this is Maria.
I certainly have no objection to going above, as far as no increase in lot size. So it's on an existing structure and they go up. I don't see any reason why we would require additional lot size. That's my thought anyways.
This is Maria. Would it be helpful at all to have Jay or some member of the staff do a couple of drawings to give us an idea, such as we did with the Coastal Community Overlay District, so that we could see what the impact might be, because there are various scenarios, as Joe pointed out.
I think that's a good idea. Gives us a little more visual image of what we're trying to achieve.
So are you guys thinking like visuals that would be more or less sort of like, I'm thinking by zone, right? Because we're talking about side setbacks relative to height allowed, right? How far in the accessory structure has to be, and then how high it can go. We could probably do that as like a, you know, per zone idea, right? In the R10, the setback is 6 feet. The current height is this. If it went to that, this is what it would look like at sort of this height versus that.
Sure.
I like that idea.
Kayla, can you just remind me if there's, I guess I should have looked at this, but in terms of the zoning ordinance, what are the specific requirements right now, or are there for the size of the accessory structure?
Yep, accessory structure or accessory.
Yep. The structure. So if I have a house that's, you know, my 1,200 square foot house, how big could my apartment, how big could my garage be?
Whatever fits, my understanding of it, this is a little outside of the lane of the zoning ordinance I usually live in, to be honest with you. It would be whatever does not exceed your maximum lot size. I don't, it's
Okay.
proportional to the principal structure so far as I'm aware. Jay, somebody correct me if I'm wrong there, but your accessory structure, I don't believe has to be smaller than, for example, your home. So like if you had a 1,200 square foot house, I don't think we would tell you that your garage couldn't be 1,300 square feet space.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. This is Amy. There are no specific requirements for an accessory structure. Now, if you're asking about the requirements for an accessory apartment, there are
Right.
specific dimensional requirements for that.
So this gets to Joe's question. You know, it's kind of like, okay, you can have two big houses on the big structures or big houses on the lot. One of them might be structures, I should say. One of them is a primary home, and then the other could be a garage with a apartment on top. So so it doesn't look like it's accessory anymore, and it is the same size. And I'm just wondering, is there any interest in thinking about size for accessory?
So hang on. You're talking about you're talking about if someone proposed this today. If someone today proposed, I'd like to build a detached garage and pop an accessory apartment on top.
Or even just a detached garage.
Yeah, so there are particular requirements, dimensional requirements for the establishment of accessory apartments.
No, but just for the garage itself. So I could build a garage as big as my house right now.
Yes.
Okay,
Just the apartment.
the only-
Put on top can only be 750 square feet.
agreed. But I'm just getting to Joe's scale issue.
Yeah, and Pam, what there's requirements about the location of an accessory structure, right? It can't be, it can't be in your front setback or your corner side setback. So it can't be in front of your house.
Right.
It can't be in the road or a side road. If you have one there, they have to be located in the rear of the main structure.
Yep.
And there would just be the accessory structure setbacks for that zone.
There's a
I
height,
think that,
right? There's a height on that as well. Yeah.
Yep, and the height.
yeah, I think that gets to, I think that a couple of the members were talking about up on Tuckertown Road where there's a accessory structure that looks like a full-on house. And so that gets to that question. So there's no existing requirement to make it, a third of the size of the primary structure or anything like that. So
Yeah, but I mean, when I was a kid, my goal was to have a 600 square foot house and a 7-car garage.
This is
now you
Marie-
got it, right, Peter?
No, I got a bunch of kids now.
This is Marie. I just wanted to mention that John Riondo has joined our meeting, and John Jeff Davis from Horsley Witten is going through the various topics on our agenda, and we've actually started with the accessory dwelling units.
Great. Thanks, Maria. Hi, everybody.
Hi, John.
Hey, John.
I mean, one thing, I know we're talking about height and stuff, but accessory structures, you know, I've come across this personally on projects. 750 square feet would have to be included on like covered porches, covered entryways. So if someone wanted to build a small accessory structure and then put a covered porch on the back, that eats up their space. So if you want to do a 1-bedroom, you know, apartment or an in-law, and you want to put a covered porch on the back, it's micro. It'd have to be tiny, and you can't get much in there.
That goes back to the days of Bobo Brown as
Yeah.
a building inspector, and it was partially because of Middlebridge, Matunic, Green Hill, cottage industry. If you allowed them to put 900 or 750 square feet and then a big porch on it, he was concerned because what ended up happening is they'd screen them in.
Yeah.
And
close.
comes another room.
Yeah. But recognize it was 600 square feet, Peter.
Yeah.
We upped it to
Right.
750 probably, I'm going to say about maybe 6 years ago, give or take. And we actually were looking at 900, but then we brought it back down, as Steve indicated. Bo Brown was concerned with porches becoming enclosed, becoming part of the structure, becoming part of the square footage and growing. So we toned it down to 750.
Yeah, I guess where my thoughts are, if we're looking to build these things for structures for people to live in, enjoy, and have space, you know, to ask someone to live in 700, you know, that small of a square footage, you know, and this is New England, we want to enjoy the outside space when we can. I think it's important that we give them an option to cover that space. There's an opportunity, they have to get a special use permit. But I just think, you know, it kind of defeats some of the purpose. You know, you can't get much in 750 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
If
I do
you think
think this-
about, you know, I mean, my clients that are doing it, like one of them is for their parents who live in Florida and they're going to live here. So they're going to have 1-bedroom, living room, kitchen space, a bathroom, and an office. And they barely fit that in that 750 square feet. 2 people are going to live there. They want to add in a porch on the outside, and they want to cover just a small roof in the front of the structure. And we now have to go for a special use permit, which seems excessive.
This is Maria. I just wanted to, not to change the specific topic, but Jeff's question about the G-Pod and the requirement for water conservation, although it should be tied to everything. I think that with an accessory dwelling unit, you could see a cumulative impact that might be realized. So I think that we should have some degree of conservation and care associated with those locations.
I've thought a little bit about that one, and what a suggestion for you guys to think about is the way it reads now. It doesn't exactly align with the G-Pod. It says in the R200 zone. And so one thing that would be a change to your housing policy to start with, because as an aside, the G-Pod, we understand, also needs a little bit of work on its own. But would be to change this from saying you need from needing a special use permit for it, and 2, just having it be accessory apartments located over the groundwater protection overlay district. Instead of splitting it in the R200, follow the thing that you're concerned with, the groundwater protection overlay district, and say any accessory apartments in that located over the groundwater protection overlay district shall abide by the following water conservation measures. And then in the G-Pod, eventually you can roll in the same requirements for residential development, whatever it feels appropriate there, to kind of bring that beyond the accessory apartments and into just residential development over the G-Pod. But I think something you could do right now to really improve this would be align it with the G-Pod instead of R200, remove the requirement for a special use permit and just make those performance standards. Just things, if you're on the G-Pod, your accessory apartment must provide the following, boom, boom, boom. Don't make somebody go to the zoning board to vet out whether or not they're using low flow water fixtures. Let the building official make that call. It gets you to the same place, but in an easier route for the person doing it.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Ties up less staff.
Yeah. That's well said, Kayla.
The height piece we'll bring back to you with a little bit of modeling. We'll also sort of work on the language side of that to get something that's proportional, with the idea clearly being heard that if you're in a spot with the 6 or 10-foot side setback, those 22 or 24 feet are more impactful on those neighbors. And we should keep that proportional in one way or another. So we'll try and bring some sketches and some numbers to that next month for you all. I think
that's.
Did we land anywhere on extra lot size and land need? In February, I think I probably told you guys pretty bluntly what I think, which is that if it's accessory, it should be accessory and should be allowed by right and not be permitted like it's a duplex. And when you're requiring twice as much lot size, you're requiring the same amount to build your 750 square foot accessory apartment as you would a full size duplex with its as many bedrooms as it wants and as much area as it wants. You'd be better served with a zoning ordinance that differentiates between those two. And in my mind's eye, if it's accessory and it's only 750 square feet in size, I think that it is perfectly reasonable to require them without any additional lot size. That is not a call I make. That is my opinion on it.
Your consultant agrees.
Well, the lot size will kind of tell you. I mean, if your lot is too small to fit it on, then you can't do it.
And if we can address through the setbacks, the right distance from the neighbors to keep it, to keep it from, say, shadowing over or feeling like there's sort of a second dwelling unit that's looking right over into your property line because it's so close to you, to where the boundary line is. I think there are other ways we can sort of get at that in the positioning. But if people have a strong opinion otherwise, if anybody has a strong or even a partial opinion otherwise, we can talk it through.
And Kayla, that requirement is not specific to accessory structures. That could be an apartment within an existing structure.
The lot size, the accessory apartment, yeah. So if you were doing it in, I believe, yes, if you're doing it in whether it is in the building attached to the principal building or an or a freestanding accessory, I believe it looks at them,
7.
but I'm going to double check that right now.
I'm almost certain that's correct.
Right. And so that has 2 separate flavors, because obviously if you have a finished basement that you could easily convert, there is no, other than the utility of it by the occupants in the outside area, there's no correlation to it. I mean, you're absorbing it in an existing structure and not putting it in a secondary structure that might be closer to a property line. For what that's worth.
So Kayla, let me just, I'm looking at, one of the relative to accessory dwelling units, the zoning ordinance requirements, and you're talking about the R30, R20, R10, the description, the lot size requirements. And I agree with you. I don't think you need the lot size that is currently depicted in section 401. I think it may be a disservice and it may inhibit the ability for people to do accessory dwelling units. And I'm just seeking other opinions on that. If the existing table which basically almost doubles. You know, R10 requires 15,000 square feet, assuming you have public sewer. R20 requires 30,000 square feet, again with public sewer, but 40,000 if it's OWTS. And the R10 jumps to 20,000 with OWTS. Are people comfortable with these numbers?
So I'll go back to what I said earlier, that if it's absorbed within the existing structure, if it's within the existing structure, I don't personally see any reason why we need to have an increase in lot size. If it is a new freestanding structure, I'd like to see the sketches that I think Kayla said would be done for the R10, the R20, and the R30, as far as show it what a typical lot site plan, what it would look like, what the house, assuming an average size house, and then what the accessory structure over to the side would look like. So for a freestanding structure, I think I haven't really come to grips with that yet, but for absorbed within an existing structure, I don't see any need for an increase in lot size.
Okay. And I apologize in advance. I realize you probably, this has already been regurgitated. I apologize for that, but all right. Thanks, Joe. I feel, I think you, myself, and Kayla are saying the same thing.
Okay. Kayla, do you feel like we've got direction on all these points?
I feel like we do.
Okay. With your permission, because this is going to be a bigger conversation, potentially, let's talk inclusionary zoning. So with that, I'm going to go to the memo, the cover memo from June 2nd, if you all have that handy. So wanted to start so the memo was structured by going through the major discussion questions that you had in February and tried to restate those, give you feedback from staff and from the consultant team, and then tie back into the results of the survey and the feedback that we got from that. So the first question related to inclusionary zoning is the income threshold. So right now, you have an income threshold of 80% area median income for both ownership and rental. Horsley Witten's recommendation is to keep that 80% for home ownership and to consider reducing it to 60% for rentals. And we can have a bit more conversation about that. I know that one of the questions that you brought up in February was, would it be possible to have a scale to say reward a developer if they were producing more deeply subsidized units and requiring more units from them as the AMI that they're serving increases. So Kayla and I had a pretty long conversation about this, and unfortunately the numbers don't work very well for this. You have to, by law, at least require 10% affordability. And of course, once you hit 25%, you're in comp plan or comp permit territory, rather. So in order to go from 60% at a certain number up to 120%, by the time you're up into 120%, you're pushing into that comp permit area. And one of our big goals when we started this project was to make it easier for developers to comply with the inclusionary zoning requirements, because right now there's just a lot of resistance, and if a developer can avoid IZ, they are avoiding IZ, and therefore the policy has not been very effective. So one of the things we're trying to do with any edits is make it easier for and more likely for developers to have complied. In terms of the survey related to this question, I have to apologize. We structured the question incorrectly. We made it an either or as opposed to a both. So if we asked, is 120% AMI appropriate for home ownership and rental, people could choose one or the other and not both. So we still learned something from the survey. even with the faulty formatting, that generally speaking, and this is no big surprise, people are more comfortable offering the higher AMI for ownership and more comfortable offering a lower AMI for rentals. Even after all this, I think from, again, the advice of your consultant, I think we have not changed our opinion. I still feel pretty strongly that the 80% AMI for ownership is best practice. And that, you know, if you were comfortable reducing rental to 60% AMI, that hits more of the population that you have in town now that is struggling to find rental. So probably serve the population that needs it most. If you felt strongly about going up to 100% AMI, we could understand that, but I would probably advise you against allowing 120% AMI for ownership, primarily because we have found, and even in a hot market like South Kingstown, once you get up to 120% AMI, that's nearly $100,000 salary a year. And someone making $100,000 a year can find market rate housing in South Kingstown generally. It may not be their dream home, but they can find it. And if you can find a non-subsidized, non-de-restricted home within your price range, I mean, the vast majority of people are going to choose that over something that does have a deed restriction. So wanted to open it up to that issue, the income threshold. How are people feeling?
This is Maria. I agree with everything that Jeff said. I think that we need to be thinking about 80% for the owner occupied and 60 for the rental. I mean, the intent of the law is to assist people who actually need the help, and 60 would go a lot further in doing so. And we can also find, and again, further on in this memo, other ways to incentivize in addition to changing this to 60%. I think that with a combination of other incentives might be really helpful.
This is Pam. I totally agree with what Jeff and Maria have just pointed out.
This is Joe. I mean, I agree with it, but then I think we also have to be concerned that the alternative is that the developers will be pushed towards the comprehensive permit. And if they're too far apart, we're going to end up, and we've seen a lot of activity recently, it seems, with the comprehensive permit. So we got to, you know, we also just got to take consideration that that is the alternative that's available to the builder. I just think we need to balance the thought of what the community's needs are as well as what the builder is able to build. So that's just my thought.
So Joe, with that said, and your experience with the Affordable Housing Committee, where do you think the numbers should be on the home ownership?
Well, I think if we were only concerned about affordable housing and trying to get as much affordable housing as, or I shouldn't say as much, but do as much as we can for people that need it, we want the number to be lower. I think that that's pretty clear. I think that the whole issue though is that you're competing against this comprehensive permit. And I think we've seen in the planning board a lot recently, developers will go to the comprehensive permit because they only have to go, instead of having 20%, they go to 25%.
Yeah.
But then they can go in and ask for a bunch of zoning changes, which we don't have a lot of control over. And they go for 30 years and instead of the 99 years. So we end up losing control if we try to push too hard. And that's what my concern is. Yeah, I would love to see 60 and 80%, but I just don't know if that is really possible. It's doable.
Yeah. Well, I know the applications that we've seen of late, obviously they're leaning towards the 120 mark. And that's, I think the last three, if I remember right, have been pushing for 120, and we're trying to reverse that, bringing it down to 100 and sometimes even less. But you're right, it's a perplexing conundrum by virtue of the comprehensive permit. And you're right, it's a fine line. And I think we heard that basically from Alex Petrucci, who in his own way was able to articulate, the disincentive. And I thought he did it, admirably. And yeah, it's a challenge. I hear you.
In
Question.
an ideal case, and I'm trying to think about what would work for both, and I don't want to make it too complicated of a formula and all that. But if it's 20%, maybe it's 20% if they're at 100%. But if they build a house or an apartment for 80 or 60%, maybe we can go down on the percentage. Now, I know that means that we don't get quite as many affordable units, but what it does is it allows the developer to choose. Do I want to build one and offer it at 60% an apartment, or do I want to build two and offer them at 80 or 90%?
Yeah.
And the developer's going to decide what's options best for him, and hopefully, if we get that percentage right, we can get some at the 60%, some at the 80 or 100%.
Yeah,
And
Maria.
I don't want to make it too complicated either.
A question for Amy. Is there any current means by which we can strengthen our ability within a comprehensive permit, or would that completely rest on legislative changes to the statute?
Strengthen our ability. So one thing I'm thinking of is we could require a 99-year deed restriction. So the statute in its definition of LMI housing indicates that will remain affordable through a land lease and or deed restriction for 99 years or such other period that is either agreed to by the applicant in town or prescribed by the federal, state, or municipal government subsidy program, but that is not less than 30 years from initial occupancy. I believe we have the authority to require a 99-year deed restriction if that is seen as something we can do to promote affordable housing that lasts longer than 30 years. Incidentally, in some other municipalities, and this may be driven by the monitoring agent, I've heard that at least one monitoring agent now has a policy of when LMI units transfer, that they will restart the affordability clock. And I'm surprised that they're able to get away with that, but apparently that has been the case for at least one monitoring agent. So we may not, whether or not we take action, it may be that the monitoring agents, the affordable housing agencies are starting to require that on their own.
And that's one of the things we talked a bit about with the Affordable Housing Collaborative, is that you could be more prescriptive about your requirements for a monitoring agent and what expectations are for screening of owners and renters and the resale value and so forth. Right now you have that very flexible, but you have the power to add standards.
That is true. Good point, Jeff. I just question, given their limited resources, even if we impose additional standards, how much will the monitoring agents actually be able to do in reality?
Sure, but at the very least, you can give them a checklist, and so that they know what your expectations of them are, and it's a little easier for you to hold them accountable. But yes, of course. So if it's anything like this, there's the time involved and the staff time involved in monitoring is a serious concern. One thing I wanted to bring up, and I think Maria was alluding to this, we didn't look at the income threshold in isolation. We're really also looking at it in terms of the bonus density. And when we sat down and interviewed several local developers, the fact that you just expect the inclusionary units to be the bonus density, something they really took umbrage against. It was like, well, that we can't make up our money when the units that you're allowing us to build are just the ones that have the D restrictions on them. So with an actual bonus density that gives developers additional units. We're hoping that that will help offset the existing income thresholds by actually concretely giving developers, making them more whole at the end of the day.
When we say 80% AMI, what is that, or what's that structure? What's that sale price?
That is a just strangely complicated question that should not be that complicated, Pete. It depends on the number of bedrooms in the unit. So basically the size of the home correlates to a family size. And then the family size, incomes are adjusted for family size.
Yep.
So it's like a little bit of a moving target. So a 3-bedroom home versus a 1-bedroom apartment at 80% area median income are looked at as different prices being allowed for them because of the family income that goes with them. So they change a little bit depending on what they are. I don't have a fresh number on my head, but the sales prices for homes we've seen, I'm trying to recall back what we've seen recently for things that come through at 80% AMI, but like a 3-family home ends up being like in the low, I believe it's in sort of the high 100s, low 200s for like a 3-bedroom home, but I can do a little look in here.
I mean, the reality of that is the developer's paying for that. There's no money to be made. There's nothing there. So, I mean, if we're talking about reality and we want these people to build stuff, maybe we should, you mentioned Alex earlier. He builds the most value home that I know of. When I hear what he can build a house for, it's $100 a square foot less than what we can do it for. So if you want people to do this, you can set all these rules, but if you want them to do this, there needs to be a number to make it work for them. Like if you're selling a house for the high hundreds, no one's going to do it.
Well, and that's why the bonus density is so important, that you're actually getting additional market rate units that you can build and get some profit on in order to help offset the investment that you're putting into the affordable units.
Right. And so you almost like, and right now and we've I think everybody on this call has had this conversation a few times in different lights, in different ways, be it with the developer or in a work session conversation, but that is largely why the density bonuses sort of need to come in line here, because that is, to be honest with you, it seems as your biggest issue is that a lot of these developers, if they were getting additional market rate units too, would be more likely to build the affordable units. They don't want to build them because now they're just being sort of added on.
Right.
So they say, well, I'm going to find every way I can to not do it. But if it comes with it to say, yeah, and we're going to give you those 1 or 2 additional market rate units too, we're going to find more cooperation there. I want to tie this back to Joe, to your comment about the ability to sort of say, is it 1 at 60 and 2 at 80? That was what Jeff and I played with and kicked around the numbers on a few times over, but the scale of projects you all see come through in South Kingstown, there's not much playroom to say at 80%, it is a 1-for-1 exchange. At 60% area median income, actually, let's do that reverse. If it's 60%, we said you needed to give us 1. At 80, it becomes 2. The proportions to get whole units to actually make a difference in the units, you don't have a lot of room to play with. An average developer we're seeing is being asked to build 3 or 4 total. And so to think about that 3 or 4 total, then trying to create a different ranking in to say you need more at a certain price point or less of them at a higher price point, or the other way around, I keep saying that backwards. There's not a lot of room there to create a meaningful difference. In theory, it works. And if I was very interested in it after our February work session, which is why I made Jeff talk it through for a long time. But we've got, if you were seeing very significantly sized developments, you might be actually in a place where you could potentially see that net different numbers of units, but the number of affordable units being required through inclusionary, there's such a tight window there between 10% and then 25% becoming a comprehensive permit, that to start to try and tier in there, we couldn't figure out a way that it was going to create a meaningful policy impact for you, to be honest. And that's why we're sort of thinking, if we went with more of a 60 for rentals, because rental housing at 60% area median income, people are very stressed, very financially challenged to likely purchase a home, and we do need good solid rental supply in town. But if we got to a 60 and an 80, and then we talk a bit about what the appropriate density bonuses is, I think we see that 80% AMI start looking a little less unattractive to a developer.
So Kayla, question, and this could go to Jay and Brian as well. And when you entertain developers and are having these discussions in your office, how often does the offsite alternative come into play, if any?
Every now and then. I'll tell you, this is what an average conversation sounds like. When do I have to build the affordable unit? 6. 6 units makes me build an affordable? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to stay under that number. And how can I parcel this out in different ways to make sure I always stay under that number? That is the first way the conversation goes.
Yeah.
Once we get through that part of the conversation, where we say, we're going to count you retroactively for your other lots that you split off, you're not going to sort of dodge this along the way, we're going to hold you to your inclusionary zoning requirements. We are asked about offsite units. I'll say this. In my experience, I'm asked about offsite units when somebody is already pretty far down their development line.
Okay.
I tend to be asked about offsite units when somebody has already started thinking through what it was to do more than just draw an extra lot on the page and call it an LMI lot, but they're actually thinking about what it's going to cost them to build it, how it's exactly going to go. I find a lot of people, not a lot, but I'm going to say your sort of your usual suspect developers who you see, we tend to see when they already have an approval in hand saying, how could I make this offsite now? Could I do that? Because it's when they're actually trying to put together their financials for the whole project that it seems to me they start really internalizing what that affordable units are going to mean for them.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that, I mean, yes, I have had conversations with Petrucci, with Hallberg about all of their projects and about whether or not they could offsite them. Yes, no. To some level of interest. They all seem to be quite interested in it. One thing that relates to the sort of make this predictable for the developers is there are some of these questions that weirdly enough, we all know far better than the developers do. We sort of tend to know how difficult a sale of 120% area median income deed restricted affordable home is, because those households can usually stretch and buy something not deed restricted. And the market tends to be a much slimmer market of people who are interested in it, right? Those sort of things. Oftentimes it takes a developer having been made to build and sell them a few times before they start to realize how that's going to impact them. Otherwise, it tends to be when they're at the tail end of their project that they start really thinking about what it is going to be to do these things.
Okay, thank you.
I would love to see a thing that is part of this inclusionary zoning conversation is getting a bit of a guide to give developers. I would love to see you all ask the Affordable Housing Collaborative to advise you on what something like that should look like and have in it, and sort of task that committee with what would be sort of a multi-meeting work project for them to help figure out what it is we need to start making sure developers know from their pre-apps on about how inclusionary zoning is going to work. Having something that is a reference to them that asks them to think about whether or not they'd prefer offsite or onsite and when to start those conversations and things like that.
And how to have a model deed restriction and where to find the monitoring agent and just all these things that, you know, if a developer is not familiar with it, they don't want to deal with it. So there are the things that you can change in zoning to incentivize participation. But as Kayla said, I think you should absolutely take advantage of the expertise of your housing, affordable housing collaborative, and have them develop those hand-holding tools just to make people feel more comfortable with the process.
Is there, I love that idea about kind of being proactive at sharing some of that. Is it unreasonable to put something in all the myriad of checklists to kind of say, check out this fact sheet?
No, I think it's perfectly, I think it's yeah, I think you certainly could incorporate it into your checklist for anything that required inclusionary to say it. You would, honestly, you could put it at pre-app and make it as early as possible, right?
That's what I mean. Yeah, like even while they're just starting to think about it, as you're saying.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's continue the conversation, if we may, down to the next question, because this all does, of course, interrelate, and we can come back to some of these issues if these next things trigger ideas. This, I think, is a little more straightforward. I'll be interested to hear what you have to say. There was a conversation about whether or not IZ should apply to all development everywhere in town. Whether, for example, maybe it doesn't need to apply to residential compounds, or maybe it doesn't need to apply within the R200 zone. So we had asked folks in the survey how they felt about that. And 71% of respondents favor reducing or eliminating IZ requirements in lower density zones. And the flip side of that is that there was also a comfort with having greater density where you want it. So using IZ as a tool to funnel density where you want it and not necessarily have to require this extra density in parts of town where you don't want it. Any thoughts on that concept?
I agree with the idea that that in residential compound that perhaps we should not require it. Obviously, we want to try to encourage it within the village centers. And then the whole future sewer service district is also, I know, sort of in flux a little bit, but that seems like a good idea.
I'll tell you, I'll share with you guys something I was sort of batting around before the meeting in my mind. I think the residential compound makes sense to exclude from it, to be honest with you. The residential compounds are by definition supposed to be very, very low density. They get relief from development standards. It's sort of a different thing, to be honest with you. I think it's okay to sort of call that separate if you wanted to and say residential compounds wouldn't be subject to inclusionary zoning. The R200, I've been thinking about this a little bit because I got roped into doing some visioning with the school department last month. And an interesting thing that I heard coming out of that conversation is this feeling that at some point in time, it was decided that if you weren't a person of means, there were certain villages that were appropriate or affordable for you to live in. And that if you were beyond that, it wasn't really appropriate. And this was something I was hearing through sort of the lens of teachers and principals of the schools. And so it made me think a little bit about what it would be to say the R200 doesn't need to provide inclusionary zoning. And I think there's an equity piece here. I just think we want to think about a little bit. And I think that the general goals of directing your development towards your village centers is a perfect goal, right? It's a great goal. It's a very reflective of the place and the history and where you want to see yourselves go, sort of a goal. But I think to take your R200 and say that it doesn't need to provide inclusionary zoning might be a push that you're doing that is actually sort of increasing income inequality in large areas of your town, land mass wise areas of your town. Most of it is zoned in large acre residential for area sizes. So I started thinking about whether or not it makes sense to say in the R200 zones, there is a preference to see, there is more sort of preference or allowance to see those units become maybe offsite, right? Maybe there's more flexibility you would provide out there, but that you wouldn't reduce the need to provide affordable housing if you were subdividing in an R200 zone. You might be willing to, you know, you might, if your goal is to see the density stay very low in the R200, you might try and find ways to support more offsite units potentially there or whatnot. But I think it's strange to sort of remove a standard zone of your zoning ordinance by lot size from providing inclusionary zoning like that. I think there's an equity piece to watch there.
For what it's worth, I agree.
Kayla,
Yeah.
can you refresh my mind? The residential compounds, do they have to average 200,000 square feet per lot
They do.
in general? Okay. So it's really not a lot of difference between that.
No, they're not, you know, and the residential compound tool, it's my feeling on your residential compound is you either want it to be a tool that works and it's something different, or you want it to just absorb into your other things if it's not different. And so if you wanted to say that the residential compound is different, and in that sense, it may not require inclusionary zoning because it is supposed to be this very, very, very low density piece where even if you were providing inclusionary, you still have to keep this R200 density. You could consider sort of carving those out, but to do it sort of whole district wise in the R200, I think is something that I would just maybe caution you against.
I just want to reiterate agreement with Kayla that we do want the residential compounds to work. They are of a different nature. And if we are talking about equity, just as we talk about equity within a subdivision whereby the LMI units are integrated into the site, it's the same kind of idea on a bigger scale. So I feel that the R200 shouldn't be exempt.
I mean, odds are the type of development you're getting in the R200 is going to continue to be the people who come in and say, all right, I'll do 5 units. So even if you do keep IZ, and I think you absolutely should continue to apply it district-wide with maybe the exception of the residential compound, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of units out there anyway. But I think
would agree.
from a, at least at the very least, from an optics perspective, I don't think it makes sense to exempt the R200.
The other piece is the housing policy of a town is the sum of all of its parts, right? And we're very much in the parts right now, right? We're in section 502.6 or 7 of the zoning ordinance. We are in a very, we're in a sort of a part of the whole here. And it's not your inclusionary zoning alone that is going to put units in the core or in the periphery. And so I think that having your inclusionary zoning be a pretty level playing field is not a problem for you as a town. I don't think it is the only tool that we're even talking about in this project that you're going to have to sort of encourage it to be different, denser, and more appropriate in the villages in a certain way.
So with that, I would like to move on to the next question, which I think is probably the easiest, I hope, of any of the questions we'll have tonight. There was a conversation in February about parity between affordable units and market rate units in terms of bedroom size. For example, you couldn't have a subdivision of 4-bedroom houses and then say, well, my IZ units are going to be these little 2-bedroom cottages, right? That we would change the law to require if you are building a 4-bedroom house then you should be required to build a 4-bedroom affordable unit, or at the very least, say two-bedroom units. You're getting the equivalent in bedrooms. This was something that staff and myself agree with wholeheartedly. And this was very strongly supported in the survey. 79% of survey respondents agree with this concept. And you know, we have language that we can absolutely use to close that loophole.
I think that's particularly helpful policy when you guys start looking at people who are doing offsite units. Because when they're not working from a blank canvas, they're less likely to be able to create that 4-bedroom home. But if they could create two bedroom units in a village, that actually would be, you know, you would want to have a way to say that is comparable to the 4-bedroom home.
So the next big piece, unless there's anything anyone would like to say about that.
Well, before you go on,
Yeah.
I think we've been pretty consistent in all the projects that came before us, that trying to ensure that the affordable are representative of the market. I would like to actually figure out how we can even make that stronger. I'm not sure if that's something that we can put in our comprehensive plan or not, or some other place. But you know, a lot of times we're telling the developer, hey, we want that affordable unit at the same percentage and ratios of the project as the market. You know, I'm thinking back some of the projects where they proposed that the affordable rentals and all the markets are homeowners. So if we can try to reinforce that somewhere else, just so that makes it a little stronger argument for us, I'd like to see how we could do that.
And I apologize, if you could restate that, I didn't quite follow. What is the policy you're trying to?
The policy that we've been trying to administer on all the projects is that the affordable housing units are essentially very compatible with the market rate. What we see a lot of times is the developer will propose that the affordable are maybe apartments and the market rates are home ownership. And what we've really been pushing on the board is that they basically at the same, that they are very similar to the market rate.
So similar not only in size, but in style and ownership versus renter and.
Yeah, and the so for instance, we'll see a project where there's 40 market rate and 10 affordable, and the affordable they want to be apartments, and the market rate will be home ownership. What we look for is that some of the market rate be the rentals as well as home ownership, and then the affordable also be that same ratio.
Joe, this is Amy. I think that would be an appropriate thing to either take immediate action to amend the zoning ordinance, or if you want further study and envision this as more of a longer term thing, get it in the new comprehensive plan so that the town will have that on its agenda for zoning ordinance amendments, because I do think it's not something that could just be in the comprehensive plan. It would have to be a very specific amendment to the existing language in the zoning ordinance.
I just think that having that additional document may strengthen our argument when we are giving feedback to the applicants, and make it clearer for the applicants as well.
And we can include that in our next draft.
Doesn't the comp plan refer to with the inclusionary being of compatible size and nature?
That's in the zoning ordinance
That's in the
itself.
zoning. So
Yeah,
maybe that should go in the comprehensive plan and then be specific in the zoning. Change the zoning to.
You know what? I would tell you, you should put it as specifically as you can in both, because when people are proposing comprehensive permits, you know, right, when they're not inside of our inclusionary zoning boundaries, the comp plan is something that ends up carrying more weight with those permits.
Okay, so if we're now talking, there's two, right? Inclusionary and comprehensive permits are governed separately, and with comprehensive permits, what we're governed by is the LMI Housing Act. And so that language in state law regarding all LMI housing units proposed are integrated throughout the development, are compatible in scale and architectural style to the market rate units, and will be built or occupied prior to simultaneous with construction and occupancy. So I will say we are constrained by the language of state law. And so for comprehensive permits, we really can't go beyond what's in there. Integrated, compatible in scale and architectural style. We can't get into requiring a mix of, now, obviously, if it's by consent, that's great, but we couldn't, deny it on the basis of, well, you've got the affordables or rental, the market rates or home ownership. I think we have a lot more room to regulate in the area of inclusionary zoning.
Amy, would you have any concern about having the comprehensive plan have a little bit more that says compatible and scale shall be in, basically, to say compatible and scale in South Kingstown shall relate to number of bedrooms, things like that?
No, because that's not how SHAB interprets it. I mean, I would say this, if this board wants more guidance on what SHAB considers that to mean and what the Superior Court considers that to mean, I can provide that. That more or less to SHAB means size. And so I don't think kind of providing more detail or putting, a finer point on it in our comprehensive plan would carry any weight.
Gotcha. If SHAB looks at it as square footage and we say it's bedrooms, SHAB still looks at it as square footage. Right.
Well, not just square footage, but I'd say we're constrained by SHAB's findings on that, and SHAB hasn't been very particular about it, really because it's not defined so well in the Act. And so when things aren't defined well in the Act, they go to the purpose of the Act. What is the purpose of the Act? It's promoting affordable housing. So basically any development that increases the number is going to get a green light.
So with that, let us talk about bonus density, because this is sort of the big one. So in the memo that we provided a century and a half ago, February of 2019, whatever time means anymore, we had laid out two different ways that we thought you could roll out bonus density. And this is largely based on what number you're considering as your base for your 20% inclusionary requirement. So we ran one set of numbers that uses your basic maximum number. So when you're figuring out how many homes a certain parcel is allowed by right, using that total number as your base for the 20%, or using the total number of housing at the end of the day after you've included the inclusionary units. So the latter obviously is going to get you a lot more units, but in either case, you basically start with your basic maximum and you keep adding the market rate and affordable units until you hit that 20%. And for those of you that got a chance to look at that memo, just a couple of examples. If you had a parcel where you calculated you could have a minimum, basic maximum rather, of 8 units, then you would need to increase with 2 affordable units and 2 new market rate units for a total of 12 units, an increase in 4 units in total, which gets you to 25% affordability. If you took that same parcel and you used your baseline as the total number of units, including the IZ units, again, you're starting out with that basic maximum of 8 units. But now you're adding 3 units each, 3 market rate units, 3 affordable units, which gets you up to 14 units, total, which gets you to a 21% of that total, that 14 units, as opposed to the 8 units. And you could go about this a number of ways. This actually ties back into the conversation we had earlier about where things are appropriate. Maybe you offer the lower density calculation everywhere and the higher density calculation where you particularly want to see added density. Maybe you just stick with one over the other. I wouldn't recommend this, but you could, in theory, have the lower density bonus apply everywhere except the R200, and just require what you require today of the R200, although, again, would not recommend that. I imagine your lawyer would not recommend that. So yeah, let's talk a bit about that. What is your comfort level with this approach and these options?
Your first option with the 8 units and then the 2 bonus units and 2 affordable, giving you the 12 units. Looking at a recent development that's under review now, them trying to squeeze in the affordable has been problematic. So if you were to take your scenario of going from 12 to 14, so an additional 6 units on that original 8 lot subdivision, I'm not sure that would work in all areas.
Well, work in what respect? Where would
just
that
laying it out, depending on the siting of the land and the home sites.
In terms of hitting minimum lot sizes, or literally so many environmental constraints that you couldn't fit?
Yeah, I think you might have a hard time fitting them. I mean, one developer I'm thinking of, they're trying to maintain their original lot size. So that's part of the issue. They're not reducing lot size. But again, excuse me, I correct myself. That was flexible design proposals. So they could reduce the lot size. But I'm not sure, going from 8 to 14 units versus 12. I think it would depend on the site, and I don't know if it would work on all sites.
Well, of course, if you have a bonus density, it needs to be applied across the board. You do have the ability, you've already given yourself the flexibility to alter your dimensional requirements, including lot size.
Mm-hmm.
So you've given yourself the flexibility to play with a lot of things. And really, the only place you hit a brick wall is if there are environmental constraints.
Yeah, and it might make a difference if it's in the sewer area as well.
So if we take that, I'm gonna start this with like the very like most base level question here, or at least like an acknowledgement, which is that market rate unit incentives are a shortcoming of your ordinance now, right? So whatever you put out here is gonna have a result of increasing the development of any subdivision or land development project that triggers your inclusionary zoning. The real sort of the kind of value question to be had right now, and sort of a large picture, is one for one enough, or do you want to find ways that you're not just offsetting the required, right? Not just getting to the 12, but that you're finding ways to create more units, period, on top of them. That is sort of, I feel like, the question Jeff is kind of posing in here specifically, right? Is the basic maximum number ends up with slightly fewer units and a slightly higher percentage of those units being affordable. if you instead allow them to sort of calculate in what is actually being built, the total housing units, right? And you're counting what are those required inclusionary units and market rate units to then calculate what's needed. You're just seeing an increase in more units there, right? That is really sort of the question, I think, to you all as a board is I wanted to acknowledge it so that no one else felt like they needed to, but I think it was important to acknowledge right now, you don't provide any, right? And so whatever you provide here is inevitably going to have some of those concerns about the lot sizes will be reduced because of it. It is inevitable, right? They're going to have to fit it on there. And if they've maxed out the land, then the lot sizes are going to get a little smaller. The question to you all really, I think, is more along the lines of, my gut feeling on you all is that we're probably more inclined to start on the smaller side with just these sort of basic maximum numbers. But if there are areas where you want to see that be a higher number, then let's talk about sort of where those would be and what would make you all want to maybe look at doing the total housing units calculation on it. Are there places where you'd like to see just the blanket increase in units go up at such a point, go up more? And so you'd be more inclined to use that total units calculation? Or do you want to leave it at offsetting the affordables with market rates and keeping it with the calculation on the base yield?
I think that would be dependent again on sewers. So maybe you could offer that in areas that have sewer.
Okay, so Steve, for you would be if it was, like in either an area serviced by sewer or a subdivision that was going to be serviced by sewer, that you'd be willing to see that be the total housing units number that gets considered?
I could live with it from that
that
aspect.
Say it again, Steve?
I could live with it from that aspect, that it's, requiring that it's a sewered area.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, it goes to the previous discussion we had on the accessory unit and the amount of square footage, whether it was sewered versus not sewered. So I could see that. Makes sense.
I would hate to see a greater increase in units without a corresponding increase in affordable units. Because that's what we're supposed to be talking about.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is,
So it would. I mean, in our scenarios, for example, you end up with 2 affordable units in the first scenario and 3 affordable units in the second scenario. So you end up with more units total and more affordable units.
And I think Kayla mentioned this earlier. There needs to be incentive for these people to build them, or they just won't build them. So, I mean, if that's the, another market rate one that they can get to make more money to offset, then it makes sense.
You think the 1-to-1 helps, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, maybe more, but I don't actually know if 1-to-1 actually helps. You're right.
Well, it's a lot better than you've got right now.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say.
In 10 years, maybe we can get more. So, I mean, I think the reality is the intent of this is more affordable housing and more housing. And we want to incentivize developers that are going to build more housing or more affordable housing. This is one way to do it.
To Steve's point too about the sewers, I think that's an important aspect of all of this, and other utilities having access to sidewalks and transportation and that sort of thing is somewhat related as well.
And with more units, you can spread that cost a little easier.
So what we could do is we could play with it to get it to a place where if you're on if it is within the future sewer service area and will be serviced by sewer, that we could be providing sort of this higher ability to put more units there, assuming it is, and so our assumptions I'm hearing are sewer and other infrastructure, right? Maybe pedestrian connections, sidewalks, things like that. So
Definitely.
it might be that you say all inclusionary zoning is allowable for the sort of basic, we need to sort of make whole the developer. If we require them to build it, we'll give them the one to offset. But that we could allow them to use the total unit calculation, which in the end increases their total yield on that property in areas where, and then we would sort of specify what those characteristics of those areas are. Is that sounding like what you all are thinking here? Something that says, if serviced by sewer and located in the future sewer service area, if existing pedestrian or alternative transportation networks are present or will be extended. Is that sort of, that's what I'm kind of hearing here, is that if that came back to you all in regulation ease, would that seem similar to what you're saying to me or different?
I think it would be similar to what, at least what I'm hearing, it would be similar.
I agree.
Yes.
Kayla, can I just add something? I'm just wondering about, sometimes when we add in more than we're reducing buffers to wetlands and things like that, so is there a way to do it so that we are not then reducing some of the environmental? I mean, so here we're talking about adding things in if you have this and this, but is there a way to also say, and you can't get a relief on a buffer width?
I don't
this
think
is
you can
Amy.
anyway, right?
I just want to remind everyone, keep in mind, we know that those DEM regs are still in process and many years overdue, but the draft regs were released, I want to say August or September. And at some point, they're going to become effective. So just keep that in mind. And those regs, once they're in place, will supersede our ordinances regarding buffers. Also keep in mind the law that was enacted in 2015 prohibits us from enacting any more restrictive regulations with regard to wetland buffering.
But also, Amy, the town would not be able to say, oh, well, we're going to give you relief on the buffer, the state mandated buffer. I mean, we have to follow that regardless.
Yeah, relief would be through DEM at that point.
But adding units through inclusionary zoning is not necessary, doesn't mean that you're expanding the net buildable area within the subdivision. You're still not forcing your way into areas that wouldn't otherwise be buildable. So I'm not sure that I see the environmental impact, assuming you're in a sewer area. Certainly if you're in a OWTS area, yeah, you're putting more waste into the ground within that footprint.
DM's not going to let you do that either.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So I don't think there's any reason to add that into the zoning or to make it, that you can't.
I think the developers just have to get used to the idea that they can't advertise the full-size lots. It's a lot, and the lot has a certain value. And it doesn't necessarily mean if a quarter acre is worth less than an R40 or an R30 in a certain development. It is specific to that development, and the land has a certain value. And whether it's sewered or not sewered, but trying to hold to a certain lot size is defeating the purpose for some of these developers.
But to Pam's point, sometimes buffers are not necessarily related to wetlands, but they do provide important functions. And we've recently seen a project in which, due to the inclusionary zoning requirements, the the applicant is trying to reduce the buffer. So I think that that is something that we need to be thinking about moving forward.
Well, that was my point to the lot size. They need to reduce lot size to maintain the buffers. And, you know, that's not always getting through to the developer. They look at waivers instead of reducing lot sizes.
And then also related to this, even though we haven't gotten to the specific point of discussion, we need to find a way to make lots that might be built off-site more feasible. I don't know what that is, what the solution is, but we need to think about that. That needs to be part of the conversation.
I think part of this is sort of a cheap answer to an expensive question you just asked, but I think part of the answer in my mind is the guide book, because part of it I think is asking the right question at the right time. And, you know, to the sort of thing I was describing earlier, if you know, if a developer's project isn't coming in for final plan approval when they say, could I offsite these LMIs? Then they'd be able to have that conversation with you all as a planning board a lot clearer to talk about this site is a site with significant environmental features. It's a site where the buffering is going to be important. It might be a site where we would be more willing to see offsite units be supported here, you know, and having them bring that information to you all out of the gate is how then you can inform them on what your interest or preference would be, right? Right now, your regs say it is your desire to see units on site first, and then you sort of allow off-site and you sort of say beyond that, and if not that, then we consider this, right? But I think bringing it forward to, well, one, changing that language to not say it is always the preference to have on-site, but to say it is probably the preference to have on-site, but where environmental conditions or something about the site means that incorporating this might be more impactful in this location, we would then encourage it to be off-site, right? And describing that a little bit clearer, and then also asking the applicant to bring you their thoughts on that far sooner than they usually do in the review process.
It should be like a burden of proof that they've got to hit to say they need to do it off-site.
Right, and there honestly, and to Maria's point and Pam's before, there might be times where you all would say, you know what, we would really sort of rather these be off-site because X, Y, or Z, right?
Mm-hmm.
So good. I think we've got some clear direction on the bonus density, and I can absolutely draft something that meets what we discussed. Want to spend a little time, and this might be a simple yes or no, we'll see, about fee in lieu. So we don't have much, if any, flexibility in terms of how we structure the fee in lieu. That is very clearly delineated by state law. It really is a question of, yes, do we want it? No, do we not want it? If yes, then you just have to make sure that, you know, you've got a system in place to accept and spend those dollars within, I believe it's a 2-year period. You just have to feel confident that you have the capacity to manage those funds.
Amy, if memory serves me well, didn't we have a problem with the fee in lieu at one point, and we weren't meeting the state act, and that's kind of how we kind of got away from it?
Correct. Yeah, our ordinance as written is problematic.
Yeah. And I don't remember if we just let it, I think we just left it on the back burner. We haven't really decided to take it up front or even discuss it at all. So Jeff's point is well taken. Is it warranted? Do we want to have the conversation?
I think we should explore all avenues, including the fee in lieu of, while concurrently working to get changes made to state law so that we're able to have it for more than 2 years, and also the assessment.
So Jeff, in your memo, you in bold type, you have the most recent annual calculations available are for 2017, with South Kingstown allowing a per unit fee in lieu of 49,000. So I'm just going to bump that up to 2020, and I'm going to say 60 from a point of discussion.
John, our problem is that we can't change that number.
Okay.
Yeah, that is calculated by the state every 3 years. So actually, it should be recalculated this year. I honestly haven't looked at it in a while. I don't know if they've done the calculations for 2020 yet. But yeah, that's why I said, like, you don't get to choose that. Rhode Island Housing will do that calculation for every municipality, but they will guarantee that at a minimum, it's $40,000, and some communities will be higher than that.
Okay, I guess my point, the number is insignificant. It's just a question of how comfortable are we with applying the fee in lieu of in our development regs and land use regulations and overall policy. Do we see it as an opportunity? Do we see it as another tool in the quiver, as Maria indicated? And how, so how do people feel about it?
My feeling is right now, the answer would be no, because we don't have a mechanism to ensure that those funds go to what the intended use are. I think that we should be having a conversation on establishing some type of mechanism, because it would not only be fee in lieu of, it would also potentially be other sources of revenue, such as real estate, transfer taxes, and those types of things. And if we had that mechanism established, and I think we should figure out how to get that mechanism established, we being the town. And then once that mechanism is established, I think we should definitely consider it. But right now, I just don't see us getting there without that mechanism.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Joe. And you might have that money sitting there, and whether it's 49,000 or 60, it might not be enough to do anything. So unless we have some established criteria and rules and how it's going to be used, and
we would certainly hate to lose that money as well if it were put in this pot.
So to the point that Joe made, Amy, about the mechanism, and I agree with him, can you revisit on behalf of the board and for the staff as well, and give us a very brief memo that outlined the hiccup we had, why we put it on the back burner, and why it should be part of our toolkit in moving forward? Is that
Yes, with the exception of, the policy question, that's for you to decide whether it should be, because you may well decide it's not something you want to allow, because you may find that what you really want to see is the production of actual units versus a flow of money to the town that the town either has to manage itself or turn over to Rhode Island Housing. But yes, I will work on an update to my previous memo. Yes, will do.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it.
Hey, John, I would recommend maybe that if you can, that an action be given to the Affordable Housing Collaborative, that they come back with recommendations on establishing a mechanism where funds can be used to create additional affordable housing units. And those funds could come from various sources, this being one, and like I said, it could be real estate transfer. But they've been kicking it around anyways, so maybe a formal request from you or from the board to come up with some recommendations and how that would create affordable units and get back to you.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I like it. Staff, can we, I'm not going to ask Kayla, but I will ask Jay or Brian if that's feasible, if you guys could if you could draft a memo to that effect.
Sure.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Jeff, I have a question. Do you know of any other municipalities in the state that are using fee in lieu or even using it effectively?
I can't think about, I'm almost certain there are. I can look into that for you.
It could be, go ahead, Gary.
I was just gonna say, one thing that Joe Murphy will recall if no one else. One thing that the Affordable Housing Collaborative was working on with the town manager for a little while was a concept, and I don't know right now whether it was popular or unpopular. So please, no one hold it against me if it was wildly unpopular with everybody. But this idea of what it is to buy a deed restriction onto an already developed parcel as potentially a way that we could spend this sort of money. So taking sort of somebody who may potentially be estate planning, has a home, might be willing to say, sell the deed restriction and make it a deed restricted unit for an already developed home. It was a concept that Rob was trying to think about on how we could employ these type of funds in a way that got us for a dollar figure far less than what we all know it actually costs to build an LMI housing unit, because 48 or 60 still isn't doing it. But a way that we could get a deed restricted unit by potentially buying a deed restriction on something that had already been built by somebody who might be, say, sympathetic or interested in the housing affordability topic and, say, estate planning or thinking about selling their unit, and using that money to sort of bridge the gap potentially between a market rate purchase and what it would be to deed restricted. So I think all of that to say, I think there are some things that the Affordable Housing Collaborative might have to sort of give some interesting thought into that. And there are some interesting thoughts on how to use that money. I think to adopt fee in lieu right now means knowing the policy you're going to have to use those funds. I think we're a little ways from there today.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I wouldn't adopt this unless you know you have a mechanism to spend the money efficiently and well. To that point that Kayla made, I'm actually working with the town of Smithfield on a similar project right now, and they're exploring something very similar, where they're trying to see if they can use, I believe they do have fee in lieu, and they're trying to see if their fund can be used to de-restrict existing homes. For them, they're looking less at homeowners and more rental properties, and trying to convince the landlords to take this incentive and to de-restrict their properties for affordable rentals. But again, with that, I think we've got some pretty good direction on this. The other issues I wanted to touch, and we've actually already touched on a lot of them to some extent, is the issue of parity in design. So we've discussed that. The issue of dimensional relief. We've discussed that. Again, the context of dimensional relief is okay so long as you're working within your buildable area and not encroaching into any environmentally sensitive areas. Timing of construction is something we've not discussed, but that's another one of those tools so that the affordable units are built concurrently as the market rate units are being built. And then we also discussed a little bit those controls over resale, and should we have be more prescriptive about the housing monitors, the fair housing marketing plans, and so forth. So any closing thoughts on inclusionary zoning that we have not covered yet? Okay, cool. I think we have some pretty good marching orders, and we can give you a pretty concrete draft for your review. So with your permission, maybe we move on to cottages. Everyone's favorite subject. Everyone loves cottages.
They're just so cute.
They're so cute. They're just so cute. All right, so your questions, again, we're basing this on the conversation you had back in February. And the first question was related to location. Where should cottage communities be allowed? And one thing this group was considering was allowing it anywhere within the future sewer service area, or within the R40 district or denser, so the R30, R20, R10. So we went out to the public with this survey and basically gave them 4 options for where would be appropriate. One being within the future sewer service area, another being in the village centers, another being anywhere where there is existing sewer, and then finally in the R40 district or denser. So the most popular was within the village centers. So 68% of folks said they'd be happy with cottage communities in any of the village centers. 61% said they'd be happy having cottages in the future sewer service area. So one thing that we discussed with the housing committee last week was that there's a slight disconnect. You've got some village centers. I mean, you could consider that the core village centers, or if you include Matunic and Green Hill and so forth, you do have a handful of village centers that are outside that future sewer service area. So you'd have to consider which would be more appropriate. But again, the public was generally comfortable with those locations. So given that, I would say within the future sewer service area probably makes the most sense, but wanted to get your thoughts on that locational issue.
Yeah, I would again agree. If it's within the sewer area, then it would be a go. And this is kind of a segue question, but I know recently we've had a couple of projects that the town wanted sewered and feasibility studies were done, but I'm somewhat concerned that for us to expand our sewers within this town, it's all on the back of the developer. And when sewers were originally developed in this town, it was on all taxpayers because it was a benefit to the town in general. And I don't know if any other towns do it, but it just seems like in some areas, the town or the taxpayers should perhaps put in some of the infrastructure. I'm not saying they have to put it all in and just let them hook up, but it just, some of these projects might be more feasible to be sewered if the town expanded the main sewer trunks towards that end.
Yeah, I would agree with Steve. I think we've seen recently a project that I think has been put on the back burner because of that issue. And it's not, it can be very expensive. Laying pipe into a right of way, whether it's water, whether it's sewer more expensive than water. It's a very costly proposition. And I feel that the town that would benefit from that, it has its investment in the sewer system, so it knows its capacity, it knows what it can handle. It's better if it's at its highest utilization factor, which economically works for it. So I think it should develop some type of a capital expenditure budget, annualized budget for such development and extension of sewers.
Well, I mean, ultimately, we're trying to protect the groundwater. So it's to the benefit of all that we would undertake something like that.
I think that we should have another conversation about the future sewer service area. We've alluded to it a couple of times in previous work sessions because it goes beyond just cottage zoning. And when you have, as we've had recently, a situation where something is essentially a minor subdivision, the costs associated with that seem quite limiting. That said, I think that if the thought is that we will have some kind of a utility district and fees associated with that, then we need to think about sort of what the current economic climate is for the people in the town as well, if we're talking about increase in taxes to do that. So it's kind of finding that balance.
Yeah, I mean, you'd probably have to do a bond issue, so you'd probably have to get voter approval for it. But
Yeah, I would, Maria, it's, I agree. I think it's a different conversation for another day. Because you're right, I've seen some communities where they put, once they start laying sewer lines down, the fees go to the homeowner. If you're in front of that line, you have mandates, certain amount of time to tie in, and some of the fees can be excessive. And that's educating the public. And I think, that's part of this process, is that they have to understand the value of an invested sewer system. Why do we have it? Why is it in place? Why was it built in the first place? And so that's all part of an education process, and that's going to be transparent, so that there's whatever the formula may be down the road, where the developer pays X, the community pays Y, and ultimately anybody who's in front would tie in and has their set fees. That has to be articulated clearly, and that's it's not a conversation for one night, put it that way.
For sure. So if we're in the context of cottage communities, is there, I mean, other than the fact that building new water sewer is expensive, is there any reason you wouldn't allow this type of development within the future sewer service area in the short term?
No.
Nope.
Okay. And we will make that assumption for the next draft. The next question you had discussed was parking minimums and maximums. And you had made a recommendation of having a minimum of 1 per unit as opposed to 1.5 per unit. You don't have to ask me twice. I think that's grand. So we can absolutely include a 1 space minimum, 1.5 space maximum. You had also had some thoughts on the design requirements, and I want to spend a few minutes talking about this. There had been a thought that you should have a couple tiers, design requirements versus a list of optional designs, and that's what Horsey Wooden tried to do with this draft. From our perspective, everything that we listed as a requirement, we believe should be a requirement. And that the optional design standards is where you would allow the developer to pick and choose. So I just wanted to take a moment to ask you, are there anything that we have in this draft as a requirement that you feel is onerous or should be more flexible? And if you don't know off the top of your head and you want to email staff and have them send that to me, that is totally fine, and I can take that information while we're redrafting this.
A good suggestion, Jeff.
Okay. So yeah, take a look when you get a chance. If you're reading through the design requirements and anything you're like, that just seems like a lot. So for example, one of the specific things that were brought up in February was, we have currently a restriction against vinyl siding and synthetic materials. And there was a conversation about whether or not we should allow that in order to make construction costs a little bit lower. So we're kind of neutral in that regard. So whatever this body feels is appropriate, just let us know. Another question that came up, and I wasn't sure what the context was, and perhaps some of you will, but apparently there was some discussion about the amount of open space that was needed and the maximum density that we had proposed. And I have a note that the planning board wanted to know more. Does anyone remember what that was about, or what the open space issues or concerns you had?
I think I might, but I'm going to let a planning board member see if people do. But I've cracked open my notes, my handwritten scrawl from February. That might help too.
Thanks, Kayla.
Okay, so what I have is, okay, so we basically, so the draft from Horsley Witten says a minimum of 250 square feet of common open space is provided per dwelling unit. However, not less than 3,000 square feet of common open space shall be provided regardless of the number of dwelling units. So we did a math calculation in February and said, if 250 square feet is what's required per unit, at 6 units, right, which was the minimum, is the recommended minimum for a cottage development for numbers, is 1,500 square feet of open space. And then we said, okay, but our not less than number is doubling that. And then if the planning board was looking at having the number of units in a cottage development reduced from the recommendation from HW at 6 down to 4, which was something we talked about a little bit in February, that number would sort of, again, we were just curious about whether the 250 at that point with 300,000 square feet required for minimum, how those sort of interplayed with each other, where we landed on that number. Yeah. That is what my notes say. That is all.
Caitlin, in that pre-app that we saw from Scott Holberg, how much open space did that have? Do you know off the top of your head?
I was just looking at that.
I don't know off the top of my head, but it was, I know that the average per unit sort of lot being put forward by Scott, and that was somewhere around 3,000 square feet a lot. And it basically looked to me like he dropped a lot and turned it into open space. So I bet my guess is somewhere probably close to around 3,000, maybe a little more. But I'm not looking at a plan set. That's going off of my recollection.
I was just trying to visualize how that area-wise, what that would look like.
Yeah, I think Scott Hallberg's is probably right around that 3,000. But that's, you heard how I got to that number. So.
And how many units is that in the proposal?
It was 9 units.
Okay.
8 lots and 9 units on 1.04 acres.
Well, that's actually, that's fairly in line with what we're talking about in this draft.
Okay.
I also think, again, as I suggested earlier, having some visuals of what the lots could look like relative to the setbacks in the open space would be of value for the board.
And the public.
Of course.
Of course.
Jeff, another thing that, well, I'm sorry, if you were going on to the next topic, because I wanted to ask, I missed a question when we were talking about parking maximums. And I was just wondering, and I can't remember if that was here, because we did talk about off-street visitor parking spaces with pervious pavement. But do you have any thoughts about having almost off-site parking opportunities? I think we were talking about that with Hallberg, where it's a very small space. If you only are allowing 1 spot per person and maybe a couple of extra for the whole development, if somebody has a party, do you just let that happen and they just go on the streets surrounding, or should there be any accommodation, in your opinion?
I don't think it's super necessary. I suppose it depends on the context of the site. If there is the availability of temporary on-street parking, obviously not overnight parking. In many ways, this is no different than any other subdivision where people would come and visit, and they don't necessarily have guest parking, but people are going to park in the street or double up in someone's driveway. So no, I don't. I don't think it's a huge issue. It's not to the same way that, like, if you had a large apartment complex. Yeah, that's not something I'd be terribly concerned about, but certainly.
Okay.
Jeff, do you, this is Steve, do you see the need for having any language in the deeds about the number of cars you're allowed to have on site? Does that come up in any of your discussions? No.
Would you do that for no? I mean, there are going to be the number of parking spots available if there are. If you have more cars than that, then you obviously have to find someplace else for them. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put any kind of restriction on a single family home or a subdivision where you've got a minimum parking requirement for those as well. And if you can't fit all your vehicles there, then you find another way.
Yeah, except Jeff, by their very nature, these cottage developments are going to have a lot less space associated with each dwelling unit. And in theory, a lot of times the roadways are going to be very restricted in terms of vehicular movement. Maybe having something somewhere specifying that becomes necessary.
You mean for guest parking?
Guests and or owners who may be inclined to ignore the one car rule.
I brought it up because somewhere along through the planning board, I came across an article which discussed a trend to reduce, impervious surface was to sell these, and it might have been apartments, but you were only allowed one parking space. So basically anybody that was going to rent those units knew they could only have one car on site. So
yeah, and this is basically what will happen with this as well. You will only have so many parking spots. If you say that it's one per unit, then it's one per unit. Generally speaking, they're going to be, it's not like every individual unit has its own garage. They're going to be in lots. So if you wanted to, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be that prescriptive. I would let the developer make that call based on the market. But yeah, if you felt more comfortable saying, okay, 1.5 spaces per, and the developer wanted to set aside 5 spaces for visitors and only give everyone 1 space per unit. I don't know. Those are the types of things I prefer personally to let the market sort that out. Like you as a town say, this is your limits. You can do whatever you want within these limits. And if they want to use some of that space for guest parking, great. If they don't, then their guests have to figure something else out. But I think that's one of the things while they're going through the permitting process, if they're like on a very busy road and the only access is off that road and there's no space for on-street parking within the development, and you're not allowing on-street parking on the main road with access into the site, where you could make that part of your stipulation through the permitting process. But I don't know. I don't like to get that prescriptive.
If you guys wanted to, I agree with Jeff on this one, but I also have very strong opinions on parking. You could think about, one thing that you could do is establishing a maximum in the zoning ordinance. You could find a way to give yourselves, the planning board, an ability to give relief from that through some other means. Like, for example, I'm thinking about Jeff's scenario he just ran forward there. If it was on a really busy road, there's not off-street parking going to be supported there or allowed. Maybe it's prohibited by ordinance now. And somebody found that 1.5 to be prohibitive, like the maximum, right? Saying you can only have 1.5 parking spaces for your 10 cottages. So you can only have that number. You could potentially try and think about having that be something that is approvable as sort of like in the course of development through the planning board in sort of more of a waiver format than through like a dimensional variance request that would need to be heard by the zoning board, right? I'm thinking about if somebody came forward and really had an example where they said, look, we sort of know who's going to end up being living in these things. We really want 2 parking spaces per because it's just a very social scene and it's on a busy road. There's not going to be any on-street parking that's really safe to advise here. We would like to increase to give 2 parking spaces per unit or something. You could try and give the planning board the ability to do that, give some flexibility to grant that relief in a certain way, if that was something you were really concerned with. I'd be inclined to say, when you're in a spot where you're also trying to figure out ways you can reduce impervious surface and reduce the amount of land lost to parking in general, I would tell you I would advise you to go forward as is with a 1.5 maximum and see if it starts to cause problems and then fix it if it does. But, you know, I don't know that you need to.
Okay.
Great. All right, so then another issue that, our last big issue on this point, which Kayla already brought up. I know you had discussed reducing the minimum number of units from 6 to 4. One thing I just wanted to point out is that if you do that, you might end up with a lot of proposals for 4 or 5 unit cottage developments that will not trigger inclusionary zoning. And you could end up with a number of very expensive little cottage communities, which is great. I mean, in terms of the type, there's clearly a strong demand in the town for this type of housing. But when you're looking at affordability, you might be missing the boat if that were the case. In terms of the survey, we did ask respondents what they felt was more important in a cottage community, affordability or high quality design. And actually the majority of respondents, usually so 0 to 10, 0 being design is most important, 10 being affordability is most important. And the majority of respondents answered with a 5. So most people thought that affordability and design were equally important. The next most common were the 0s, the people who thought that design was most important. And then third, the people who thought that affordability was most important. But there does seem to be a desire to achieve both with cottage communities. So that minimum unit number is just something to consider in relation to IZ.
I agree. They're both important, but I know that I was hoping that this would be part of our affordable housing toolkit. And I don't see that they're mutually exclusive necessarily. I think you can have good design as well as a minimum of 6 units.
Yeah, I concur.
Great. So beyond that, the other policy decisions related to cottage communities are really just about tinkering with numbers. If you feel, again, about the square footage for open space, the square footage for the footprint of any particular cottage, the total square footage, the basic dimensional standards for parking structures and driveways and so forth. And, I don't know that we want to get into a nitty-gritty conversation about that unless there was anything that really stood out to anyone. But again, I know you've had this document for a long time now. We have highlighted in yellow, if you go through that memo, any of those numerical standards that we could be tweaking. So again, I would encourage you, if you get a chance, refresh your memory, go through there, and if there's anything that just doesn't quite sound right, email staff. They'll flag that for me, and I can throw out some specific options.
Great. So, because I did see one that I wanted to ask about, but I could just send it to staff.
Unless you think it's something that deserves conversation among the whole group, in which case, by all means.
I'll bring it up, and if others want to say, pass it on. I think that it was something about the 350 square feet for the I'm looking for it, but I don't see it. 350 square feet for the second floor. And I was going back and forth about that proportion between first floor and second floor, and wanted a little insight on that.
That's funny. That is Nate Kelly language, and one that I kind of pushed back on the first time I read it too. So you do, it's pretty strict, right? So it gives you not much leeway with how much is on the ground floor and how much is on the second floor. I think the concept is you definitely want the second floor to be smaller in scale than the first floor to give the community that more compact feel. Your building footprint at 900 square feet maximum means, and your total floor area not to exceed 1,200 square feet means you're really looking at like a 50 square foot wiggle room from the first floor to the second floor. And again, the point of that is to sort of force more diversity in the architectural design of the second floor. But it's not necessary beyond that. I mean, you could just very simply say the total floor area is 1,200 square feet, which would allow you to have single story cottages of that size, and just allow the market and the site to determine what the second floor looks like. But yeah, the purpose of that is to have a smaller and more architecturally diverse second floor.
Yeah, I think that we had just gotten a lot of pushback on those kinds of things with the coastal overlay zone.
I was just gonna
About-
say that. We went
About
all
being
through
too
that.
prescriptive.
Yeah. And then
So I'm just wondering how we could how do we keep the intent without being too prescriptive?
Maybe it can be about proportionality, because this is different than the coastal overlay district in that there's not a rush to elevate, due to flooding potential.
You've already got the design standards and the list of options to help articulate these buildings. So yeah, I mean, you could very simply say each cottage shall not exceed 1,200 square feet and leave it at that. And that, along with the design requirements, is gonna produce something for you. If you feel very strongly that these all should be 2 stories and you want to be more prescriptive about that, then that's what this is for. So it really is just a matter of your comfort level.
I think what people think about the 8 feet tall height restriction might be an issue if we're talking about second stories.
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of what you said, Peter.
The height restriction, no taller than 18 feet.
Mhm.
If we're talking about 2 stories.
Yeah, so we're talking about, really, it's 1.5 story buildings. You're talking about a small
Loft.
second story. Yeah.
I tell you a couple of thoughts that I have, for whatever they're worth, just a couple of thoughts. I don't think you want to require them to have second stories, because another thing we're trying to do is make sure that they're housing types for all stages of life, and people downsizing, one level living. This is something that our growing senior population looks for. Because especially with a small second story, the area being small, it's going to be a bedroom that gets put up there, which makes them sort of, I think how letting them be 1 story and 2 story improves the diversity of products you're putting forward in your community. That's it.
Yeah, I will go, because again, this is something that Nate felt very strongly about and that I never quite felt as strongly about myself. So I'll have a conversation with Nate about see if there's anything I'm missing. But I'd be perfectly comfortable just simply saying shall not exceed 1,200 square feet and let the design standards sort of guide the aesthetics. And if it's a 1-story versus 2-story, we're indifferent.
I like that idea, and based on what Peter said too, with the height restriction, it's gonna be difficult to do it anyway, so.
Yep. Anything else? Again, those are all the major questions I wanted to go over today. That definitely gives me enough to go on to write you something concrete. And obviously we can continue critiquing it. But I think we're pretty close to having the direction we need to draft something that can get us to public hearing soonish.
Sounds good.
I'm going to point out something that I'm going to give Jeff some notes on, just because I won't be around to talk about it next time. The parking standards in this, one thing that we talked about in February, I'm actually not sure how much we talked about it. They look mostly at my prep notes, but some of the setbacks for the surface parking lots, I think we might tweak to align with all existing standards you have. So there's a piece in here about parking being set back 20 feet from the perimeter, 20 feet from the right of way. I think that there's a way we can massage that to have it line up a little bit more with your transition yard requirements and things like that, that sort of make it just jive and align with things that are your normal standards. So each section of your rules don't sort of have a different playbook to them completely. So Jeff, I'll send you some just thoughts on that.
Okay, I think we're done, Jeff.
Yep.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. That
Thank
was
you very
a
much.
Thanks,
good
Jeff.
summary. Good discussion all the way around.
Great job,
Um,
Jeff.
Thank you.
So I think next item, ordinance and regulatory deficiency inventory. Kayla or Jay or anybody else? Brian?
Yeah, I honestly, I'll do it because I put together the agenda for this work session for you guys. It's there because I put it on everyone. It's in case you all wanted to tell it to us.
Well, let me ask you this. There was, we talked a while back about defining a parking space. And I don't think we took it other than, and that emanated from a project that we had on Kingstown Road. I think it was back in late 2019, and our regulations did not define a parking space. And I think that was a simple one, and it's a simple deficiency that we should act on. That's one example that I had in mind.
Hey, this is Amy. That was the dollar store, right? The 1860. Okay. And one of
We
the
don't know it was the dollar store, by the way, but yes.
okay, Dollar General. Yeah, and was the question that a parking space wasn't defined in the regs, or was it more that the zoning ordinance didn't? Because I know in other situations, we've come across issues with that as well.
My understanding was not defined in the regulation. So it didn't say it must be 9 foot wide by 18 foot long. It didn't have any dimensional guidance. So what had happened is the engineer, smart as he was, started designing for subcompacts. And that is a different dimensional width. So that was the problem we ran into. And he was designing for all these subcompacts, knowing full well that you got F-150s that will never fit in a compact.
Right. So I recall now, the issue is that the zoning ordinance sets forth just a minimum square foot, and I can't recall, Kayla, it may be 350.
Exactly.
Not a specific size, length and width.
Correct.
Right, it doesn't have like a typical parking spaces 9 by 18, and if the parking stalls are at 90-degree angles or 30-degree angles, the aisle width should be a minimum of 22 or 30, like whatever the actual design features of a parking lot are.
Didn't Rich and Joe talk about some standard that's out there that we should just copy? I mean, why?
Yeah, yep.
There's a book, it's called Architectural Standards, and yeah, it has all that in there.
Yep. So in March, we picked up parking to be the first ordinance deficiency to work through. And yep, Pete, that's when Joe was talking about the sort of the standards. And I was saying, Rich had flipped through the book for me and shown me sort of, this is what you need and this is what you need. So yes, still first on the list for ordinance and deficiencies. Rich is on board on it, knows about it. Brian's been getting read in on it a bit too. I think that's the first one you're gonna tackle. The question for you guys honestly will probably be how heavy duty you want to go into parking and whether or not you want to do a quick fix for basic things and then think about bigger parking change, minimums, maximums, that stuff at the same time, or whether or not you want to just define parking stalls and then come separately at the parking issue. In March, just to sort of refresh people's memory, we talked about doing sort of a parking usage study in the villages and whatnot. And right now, no traffic studies, no parking studies are normal. And so it's kind of hit pause on it to say, all right, if we were going to do parking holistically, it's a weird time to do it. But John, to your point, the actual things that were hanging you guys up, the definition, description of the dimensions, that's a fix.
Yeah, I would agree. I would, one bite of the apple at a time.
Yeah, it seems like quick fix is in order at this point in time.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't let the good be the enemy of the perfect, or I'm saying that totally wrong, but it's 9:30. You know what I'm saying?
Close enough. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on deficiencies?
Not deficiencies, but going forward, what are we thinking for the comprehensive plan update?
Yep. So actually, we could call that a segue into planning department.
Yeah, that was on my list for planning department staff update.
So as of not tomorrow because it's TRC, but as of Thursday, that is going to become sort of the thing that I am working on only, and through my remaining time with you all. My goal is to get that through. And it means that you're going to see me probably at some meetings after I've left employment with the town. But so realistically, where we sit right now, in a dream world, I thought maybe if I worked Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I could by Tuesday have something for you for your end of June regular session. I think that is unhuman. So what is human and I can do for you all is for the July work session, have a fully updated next work through of the comprehensive plan for you all. I mean, it's basically the public comment summary, just going, honestly, at this point, it's a laundry list of things I just need to change in that plan, right? And so I intend to go through that, get it all to you all. You'll definitely be working with Jay and Brian on it on the sort of day-to-day, but I have been sort of talking a little bit with the town manager that likely when it comes to go to presentation or public hearing with the council, I'll come back out of the wings to help with that.
That sounds reasonable.
The hope is to finish it this summer and to not have me leave you all until you all have one that is at least ready to move to the state for acceptance by them.
That would be really appreciated, Kayla. Thank you.
Well, it's the first thing I ever worked on with you all, and I've been working on it.
So you got here.
I worked on it 2 weeks before I worked for the town. I'll work for it for 2 weeks. I worked for the town too, and we'll finally finish it up.
While we're on planning department staff updates, anything else, Kayla or Brian or Jay?
Not for me.
I have one about Brian. Brian's gonna be working a lot more on the SK Homestyle project. So that's, so the pieces I've been playing with Jeff Davis, Brian is probably gonna swing into that role in my departure a bit more while Jay stays in the project world. I will be with you all in day-to-day life through the 26th of June, which is quickly approaching us. And then after that, I will have you guys know I very much enjoyed working with you, but you will see me, I'm sure, at least at 1 or 2 meetings after that, just trying to get the comp plan finished for y'all.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kayla.
Excuse me, John, I'm just,
Kayla, what's the current status? Kayla, what's the current status with the planning board vacancy? Does the town council have a date when they'll do interviews, and how many candidates do you currently have?
Yep, there are 2 people who have applied for the position on the planning board, and last night the town council, I believe, asked the clerk to schedule interviews for their next meeting, which is Monday 2 weeks from last, so I think the 22nd.
22nd.
Yeah.
and what is do we have a transition plan? Any plans for filling your big shoes, Kayla?
TBD.
Pam, I think it's fair to assume that that Rob will employ a similar process as with, as last time.
I think in the meantime, you're going to see a lot of the sort of future planning efforts that are open now and underway, being things that Brian's going to be working with you on. I imagine there may be a period of time where Jay swings into the interim director position, because the posting for the position, it'll take considerably longer than the 26th to get a new planning director permanently in a seat. So I think there's some of that's coming along, but I think Rob is sort of sketching that out now. We don't have anything specific, but when I know more, I will let you all know more. I'm sure Jay and Brian will do the same.
Thank you. Sounds. We kind of jumped, but let me, so we missed the planning board liaison activities. I see Joe just disappeared for, oh,
No,
he's
I'm
back.
still here.
Okay.
The affordable housing meeting, affordable housing board, after several months of not having a meeting, actually had the meeting last week, so they're all up on Zoom. What we got was a briefing from Jeff Davis on what you heard tonight. It was just less conversation, so it went a little quicker, but he basically presented as he did tonight.
Okay. What was the general, any key issue that may have surfaced from the group collectively because of Jeff's presentation, or pretty much nothing onerous?
Nothing that stands out, Kayla, with the.
No, I don't think I had anything particular that stands out. Aside from to say the AHC, I think I kind of alluded to it earlier. They've been working on doing some other policy on accessory dwelling units, a tax abatement recommendation, and some other pieces. So they were sort of talking about making sure that the ADU pieces go, don't lose those other parts that they've been working on too. But that's our intention, to keep those going as a package.
Okay, thank you.
I have one small thing, and as further impetus for us to continue to work on our inclusionary zoning and other affordable housing issues, there was a bill submitted in the General Assembly, even though they're only considering bills that are specific to local entities, as in a municipality. There was a Senate bill introduced, 2760, that seeks to take a specific development in Richmond and consider it not year-round housing so as to circumvent inclusionary zoning. Just an FYI.
That's good. I bet it's the club at the old golf course.
That makes sense.
What's that number again, Maria?
2670, it's a Senate bill.
Thanks.
Interesting.
Never cease to amaze me.
Right.
All right. Legal issues, Amy, anything from your side?
Fieldstone Farms,
Yeah.
we have submitted our brief. There was no reply brief filed. That was back in April. I have not heard from SHAB regarding scheduling of a hearing. I imagine I don't know if they've met via Zoom yet, so that's kind of in limbo right now. The zoning appeal regarding the zoning board's denial of the dollar store on Kingstown Road will be briefed. The zoning board approved an amended decision in April, end of April, I think. That may be it for me from now.
Thank you. Staff, any further comments from any staff members?
Nope.
Okay. Well, hearing none, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved.
Maria.
Maria moves, second from
Steve.
Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.